The trade deadline is February 9, which by my count or my watch, depending on where you are in the world, that's approximately 34 days away. And the Bucks, known traders, we think maybe they need to make a move. We think maybe they're going to make a move just looking at the roster and the pieces they have. But who do they need and who are the targets? Frank's here. We're going to break down some of the possibilities for this Bucks team that, let's face it, does have limited assets. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. And we're here to talk trades today, which, let's face it, this is one of the biggest topics that people want to talk about in the offseason, at the start of the season, but particularly in the next month on the lead up to the trade deadline. So we're going to get into it today and have some fun. And I'm sure we're going to get some good suggestions from those that are jumping in the stream on YouTube, which reminds me, thanks for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every single day. And if you're missing out on the fun on the live stream on YouTube, subscribe. Hit the bell. You'll be notified when we do this. We've started doing this over the last few weeks, and it's good. It's fun. It's pretty good stuff. We get to involve everyone with our listeners and viewers as well, which is fun. So we're going to do that today, and we'll probably take some suggestions from the listeners and viewers that are jumping in the comments as well. I'm sure there'll be some superb ideas for today's podcast that's brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. So, Frank, let me set the scene here, because the big question for the Bucks right now is just simply, what do they actually need? Now, that is a little bit of a challenge for this team because, as we've discussed, their best four players, whether it's Giannis, Drew, Chris, and Brooke, have played 45 minutes together for the season. Drew, Chris, and Giannis have played 69 minutes together, and then Giannis and Chris have only played 138. And we're nearly halfway through the season. Add in the fact that Joe Ingles has barely played and all the other stuff that's going on. We haven't really seen this team. So that is a challenge, but we think we know the pieces they have. Right now, they're 26th in offense. They're 23rd in three-point percentage. They're 24th in half-court offense and 24th in transition offense. So we think that they have some offensive problems, despite the fact we think they have a top three defense and the personnel to do so. We've seen it in the postseason before. So the first question I think we have to ask ourselves, what do they need?
Yeah, and I think you kind of alluded to it, but I think you have to view this through the lens of what are they going to need when they are healthy-ish with the big three plus Brooke Lopez available. And you might say, well, geez, Chris Middleton, like, is this guy, when is he going to start playing again? That seems kind of presumptuous to just assume that he's going to be healthy soon. Yeah, but I mean, again, like, without a healthy Chris Middleton, like, there is no like championship. Like we saw it last year. It's just, the climb is just too steep without Chris. I do think part of the calculus for looking at trades is thinking about, hey, if a guy can potentially give you more cover in the event that Chris misses portions of games, or, you have to cope with him for a week in the regular season or the playoffs for that matter. Of course, like, that's bonus points. I'm not saying you wouldn't want to look for guys like that, but I think the real area of need to me is the area, who have people been complaining about for the last, not even like month, but go back to last year's playoffs. Well, it was the guys who were playing shooting guard, kind of the bench, backup guard rotation, right? It was Grayson Allen can't make a shot against the Celtics and he's too small and he's getting bullied. It was, what's George Hill doing? We want Javon Carter. Now it's Javon Carter can't do anything. And he's been in a horrible slump for the past, basically everything but November of this year. And we're just seeing, again, especially without Chris Middleton, the lack of creative, sort of the lack of scoring depth, and also just the lack of size, especially in the backcourt, is being exposed. And again, like, there's Wes Matthews is kind of around, and occasionally we see him, and obviously he was really important in the playoffs last year. So again, they have a lot of dudes that can play like the 2,
Mm-hmm.
3. The problem is, who are like 3 of those guys that you really trust to absorb all the, first off, the starting shooting guard minutes or combo guard minutes, whatever, right? With Drew, you have flexibility. You could have another point guard playing with Drew. Although we've seen the past 2 years, I mean, the offense in the regular season has been awesome with Drew and no other point guard playing next to him. But I think it starts with the starting shooting guard spot or that second guard spot. And then you look beyond Drew, who are the other guys on this team that can create scoring opportunities. And I think the good news is, again, if you're assuming that we're looking at through the lens of a healthy Bucks with Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday and Giannis and whatever Joe Ingles is going to be, then you don't have quite the same need for a point guard that's going to go out and create a bunch of offense and be like a microwave scorer or something like that. That said, could that be beneficial? Certainly could be beneficial in the regular season from a depth standpoint, and maybe in the playoffs too, right? Especially if, again, you have to cope with any period without one of your main sort of offensive focal points. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been focusing. And again, this gets back to some of the conversations we've had as well about like why I just kind of like couldn't really get enthusiastic about the Jay Crowder talk. And he's like the one guy that, I think there's been verified reporting about the Bucks being interested in acquiring him. And again, there's the thing that I've always struggled with Jay Crowder is like, hey, would you want Jay Crowder on your team? Sure. I'll take Jay Crowder on my team. I'm not saying I wouldn't want him. I'm not saying he couldn't potentially be useful, but I was on Seth Partnow's podcast last week. And we kind of talked about it. And it's like, and he brought it up again with Jake Fisher today. Jay Crowder has at some point in his career played the 3, but he's pretty much been a 4-man the last few years. And I think was I talking to Eric? I think Eric was looking at it and like trying to see like, did Jay Crowder actually defend Jason Tatum at all in any of these like recent Suns Celtics games the last couple of years? And like, he hadn't, like that hasn't been his role. So, with a guy like Jay Crowder, anybody who's like primarily like a 4-man, I'm just kind of like, again, you can tell me that's a guy that could play like small ball lineups with Giannis at the 5, that guy at the 4. Like, yeah, it could be, there's something there, but fundamentally, Giannis is playing the vast majority of his minutes at the 4. And so if you've got, especially in the playoffs, 40 minutes of Giannis mostly playing at the 4, maybe he gets like 5 to 8 minutes playing the center or something like that, just doesn't leave a lot of time for another guy, and certainly not a guy that you're going to give up a big price to. You're not going to like use your main assets, which are very limited at the trade deadline, for a guy like that. Again, it sounds like the Bucks look very closely and might have been close to trying to do something like that. So I'm not saying the Bucks don't see some appeal in Jay Crowder, but for me, it's just like the thing we came back to as well. It's not just about, is Jay Crowder a worthwhile guy? Would you like to have him on your team in the playoffs? It's also what else is available. And, I think there are guys out there, and the prices are going to vary, and we'll get into it, but I think there are other guys out there that I think fit more positionally and can be higher leverage guys who could potentially start and be that 5th starter, and who could be actually, a more reliable kind of potential closing type guy than a Jay Crowder guy, or, whatever. Pick any other kind of 4-man that you might sub in for Jay Crowder.
Okay, I totally agree. And now we need to get into some names. Now, as this is kind of how me and you are different to each other, I jotted down some names on my little notepad here. You've got a beautiful Excel spreadsheet that you have shared with me as well, which goes along with your cap sheet. Let's face it, it's on your bio on Twitter. And Bucks fans, if you've got any cap questions, or if you've got any salary questions, or you want to just know the general lay of the land when it comes to the Bucks, go to Frank's Twitter, FMaddenNBA, hit the link, go to the cap sheet, and you'll get a lot of your answers there. So it's a handy tool. I use it as well. But the Bucks are looking for players to fill new roles. It's going to be the idea of this trade deadline, which reminds me of our friends at LinkedIn. And as a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. It's very relevant to the Bucks. They're trying to surround Giannis with team members that fit what he's going to do for this team in the postseason. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences. Value is very important. Got to have a good locker room member and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data. So we know what guys have done before in the past, but you can't just rely on that, particularly with aging players, potentially like Jay Crowder. He's been sitting at home. What's he been doing over the last few months? We're not 100% sure. So that's why LinkedIn Jobs will give you all the information you need. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedinjobs.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Frank. I had a little bit too much fun with that LinkedIn Jobs ad read, but now it's time to get back to business. The names that we have. So I've got this cap sheet up. There was some stuff this morning around Bojan Bogdanovic. So I know we've got some comments in the chat, and it was pretty, let's just say it was pretty loose stuff. It wasn't anything really rock solid, but no doubt Bogdanovic, funnily enough, acquired for not all that much by the Pistons at the start of the season. The Pistons are in just absolute no man's land, as they have been for quite a while. Bojan Bogdanovic in a 19 mil expiring. I don't really know what the Pistons, in terms of what they would want for him. I think ultimately it'll come down to how many contenders are outbidding each other. Now, we know the Bucks don't have a lot. What do they have in terms of future draft picks? I know it's like 2029. They've got a first. They've got a bunch of seconds. But in terms of draft capital, it's probably barer than what some of the other contenders might be able to put on the table. Unmute yourself there, brother.
You've got multiple seconds over the next few seasons that you could potentially cobble together. But in terms of a first round pick, yeah, you got to go way out. Colin Nelson in the chat just pointed out that Jordan Clarkson was on LinkedIn the other day. So good man. The listeners are on when they're making jokes involving our topic and the ad reads. So shout out to you, Colin.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and honestly, I don't see anybody. And it's hard for me to say this because, look, on the one hand, like, let's be honest, right? Bucks window is now. Yes, Giannis is 28. You hope, obviously, that it's not like it's championship or bust for Giannis this year. But Drew, Chris, those guys are not getting younger. They are, not going to get better. You're really just hoping for their aging curves to be relatively flat, and that whatever decline does not come sharply. And obviously with Brook Lopez, as awesome as he's been this year, you hope that he can just continue doing that. But, it is what it is. He's 34 years old. So I think in practicality, you've got to really I just don't want to give up a first round pick that far out, especially anything that's, you're talking about, talking about unprotected picks and getting into sort of these Laker discussions. I just think that's a really scary place to go, especially just given the types of players that are being discussed, right? If there were more appealing guys or guys that I felt could be the third or fourth best player on, for Giannis to grow with over the next few years, then that might be a little bit different. But I don't know. The names that are out there, I just don't find compelling enough to go all the way to throwing in a first round pick. And, for a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic, I mean, he didn't fetch a first round pick in the offseason. So as much as he's played well and had some nice moments with Detroit, he got extended, got some extra money. He's owed, I think, including this year, 3 years, about $60 million. I think he turns 35 this year. So it's I'm not giving up a 2029 first round pick for that, especially because with a guy like Bojan, I don't know. I mean, can you, again, this gets to my litmus test question, especially if you're talking about giving up a lot for a guy. And that, again, multiple second round picks, you could say, well, that's not a first round pick. But again, then at that point, all you've got is a first round pick to sort of work with in the coming years. Is that guy going to start with Chris Drew, Giannis, and Brooke is Bojan Bogdanovic. I mean, I feel like he has played some shooting guard in the past, but like looking at just like his positional distribution over the last couple of years, I mean, he's a 3 part-time 4 guy, which makes sense. He's 6'7" and 34 years old. Like it's hard, for a guy like that to be running around chasing shooting guards on the perimeter. And so, could you play him? Could Chris Middleton do that? We saw Chris do that, against, for instance, the Miami Heat, running around chasing Duncan Robinson for our playoff series. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but you add that layer, and then I think the other piece too, like I would say Bojan, Eric Gordon, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who I think might be the best fit among some of the guys that could be out there if you think Atlanta was willing to trade him due to just the huge sort of cap tax issues that the Hawks are lining up for. All those guys are in sort of like the high teens in terms of their salaries. Bogdan's an expiring $18 million. And besides, I mean, let's be honest, it was faded. We all roads lead back to Bogdan Bogdanovic discussion to some extent. But if you talk about
John Horst is playing chess, not checkers. This was his plan all along. Suck it, NBA.
But if you talk about like Bojan making $19.5 million, Eric Gordon making about the same amount, he's got a player or a non-guarantee for around $20 million again next year. Bogdan at $18 million. It becomes very hard just to aggregate the salaries to make a deal there, because again, you have to be at basically it's like whatever outgoing salary, 125% of that plus 100K has to get you to those numbers. And so, like I was looking at it today, I think Bojan, to make a deal for him, if you were to package up Grayson Allen, George Hill, and Jordan Nwora, who I think Nwora is trade eligible on the 15th, that trio I think works out to like 19.4 million or something, something on that order. And I think Bojan's at like 19.55 million. So like you just can't aggregate enough salary with that group of 3. And especially when you're in season, like doing these lopsided trades when teams like maybe have one extra roster spot and they're going to have to, waive guys and eat salary just to absorb multiple contracts. Like the Pistons or any other team, they don't want to have to eat salary just to take your random dudes that they don't really want just to match a salary for a guy that you're shipping back and sending with, again, multiple second round picks or something like that, right? Like I don't think that's like the best deal that the Pistons are going to get for Bojan Bogdanovic. So again, like all these guys who are in that general salary range, and again, call it Eric Gordon, who's kind of similarly like, Eric Gordon's like at least like a true shooting guard. I don't know how much defensively he's got left. I think, at least 2-3 years ago, he was still I'd say a very frisky defender, strong guy, even though he's not that big, pretty good wingspan. But again, like Eric Gordon, really tough to make the money work. Great, definite floor stretcher, right? But between Eric Gordon, Bogdan, and Bojan, it's just, right off the bat, very hard to make the money work for all those guys. So I don't know. Let me pause there before we get like I was thinking if we kind of like work our way down sort of the salary groupings, because obviously a lot of the more expensive guys are also the guys that are going to take more to get them just in terms of value. And again, I don't know why Houston is necessarily like, they seem like really hesitant to trade Eric Gordon, which I don't really get, to be honest. But he's been on the trading block for like a year and a half and hasn't been traded. So I guess they for some reason value his veteran leadership, even though the other day he was basically saying that like the team hasn't improved at all, which I thought was kind of funny. So, but I don't know. Any thoughts from you on that kind of trio to start with?
Well, the only thing I would add, and because a few people are mentioning it, and this was something that I brought up, originally. And I know what people are going to think. This is blasphemous to say. But when Joe Ingles came back, I said, well, now at least you get 6 weeks to have a look. If they really thought that there was a move there that they could make that would significantly upgrade the roster, now I don't think that they're going to trade Joe Ingles. I don't think that. But that with the 6.5-ish is obviously another way they can get there a little bit easier. And maybe for some team, depending on who it is, it's a little more attractive. The only thing I would say with Houston is that, and this is why it's makes sense to go through all these names and have a look at all these options, because I didn't think that there was any way the Bucks had enough to make PJ Tucker work either. And I, still to this day, I'm a little bit surprised that went down. I went back just to make sure my mind wasn't going crazy. But you essentially had DJ Augustine, a contract that was no good. DJ Wilson, a guy that never played, and then you basically just swapped back about 8 or 9 spots in the draft. I mean, it's an unbelievable trade that went down for such a guy, for a player that was so impactful on a championship run. So that's why I kind of, Ingles, if they really want to go in, but you never know what these teams are going to do. It does seem like there's a pretty robust market this year. We saw the Celtics at least create a roster spot this morning as well. We think maybe they're setting themselves up to make a move. So there's going to be a number of teams that are going to look to do so. I think we just go through the list, but I'll get to Bet Online first, so then we can just roll through and go as long as we need to go. And let's be honest, we're going to go long today. There's no doubt about that. So go to betonline.net. This is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. As I pointed out the other day, the Bucks were down to 4th favorite for the championship, and Giannis was 4th favorite for MVP at betonline.net. Now, it's been a couple of nice days for Giannis, no doubt about that. The Bucks at least won a couple of games. Hopefully, they'll get some bodies back in the next week, so maybe you see some value there. But it's not just basketball. We've got college sports, and obviously NFL that is cruising towards the postseason as well. And the Packers are just starting to get some stuff done. I hear it's a pretty big game this weekend. So go to betonline.net to find all the latest odds, news, and analysis. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. I'm looking at this list, Frank. And by the way, I should point out, we did have a note from Alexandris who did point out that Bojan, and you said it as well, Frank, but we're going to give some credit here. Alexandris did say that Bojan signed an extra 2 years, so there was another 2 years added to that deal once he went to Detroit there. So not an expiring this year. Great pickup. Do you want to just go through this list from the top? Is that what you're thinking, Frank? Because Alec Burks is at the top.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't treat this like I'm kind of literally reordering this on the fly. So the one other guy, let's take it sort of by groupings. So like the kind of like high rent district guys that I have here, again, I've been using sort of 20 million as a cutoff. I just think like Buddy Hields, I think a little over 20. Seth actually mentioned Buddy Hield just as like a microwave sort of shooter scorer guy as a potential option. I just, again, once you start getting into those dollar figures, I think just that salary aggregation becomes really hard. And by the way, Kane, I'm proud of you being the one that bring up Joe Ingles as a potential piece in a trade, because I mean, in practicality, it's like, who would you rather have, Bojan Bogdanovic as a 3-4 guy going into the playoffs, or Joe Ingles? No slight to Joe Ingles, but I think
it depends who you ask, Frank. So just watch your mouth there, pal.
But it's sort of those things. It's like, well, if you're acquiring Bojan Bogdanovic, who's like a 3-4, like, why are you like desperately clinging to Joe Ingles? Again, if you can make the deal without including Joe Ingles and you can include those other guys, like, okay, like I get that. But it's like, is Joe Ingles in his expiring contract, and the whatever, like your soft spot, again, not your soft spot, Kane, but the Bucks soft spot for Joe Ingles, right? And you feel for him, because like last year he gets traded while he's hurt, and he's just like, well, what the hell? I wanted to sign up with the Jazz, and now I'm like kind of floating around, like figuring out where I'm going to do my rehab, because I'm not ever going to be a Blazer. It would suck for Joe Ingles to get randomly salary dumped, especially on some like bad team. But I mean, this is the business, right? I mean, he got a very nice contract to come to Milwaukee, and this is sort of part of the deal is you can be traded. But so again, like I totally agree. Like I would hope the Bucks are not treating Joe Ingles as an untouchable trade asset, because certainly we haven't seen enough of it from him to suggest that he should be treated as such. But yeah, I'd say the expensive guys that would be more difficult to obtain, both for contract reasons as well as the fact that they're just good, and good players require more assets that the Bucks may not have, would be both Bojan, Eric Gordon, and then the guy I didn't mention, but who I think should be in that grouping as well, Gary Trent. Yes, he was one of the Raptors that missed practically every shot yesterday. He did hit that big shot late. But Gary Trent's a pretty solid defender, a guy that, again, is not like a lights out shooter, but he's also, I would say he's like a more dynamic shooter to me than like a Grayson Allen, who again, I feel like is very much like a standstill shooter, can stretch out a bit, but is not like a guy that is shooting heavily contested threes all the time. Yes. Ayani Khan just suggests that Kane would leave the pod if Joe Ingles was traded. Hey, Kane was here before Joe Ingles. Kane will be here after Joe Ingles. I'm not worried about that. But yeah, I would put
Not
Gary
leaving.
Trent in there as well. And again, like Gary Trent, see again, like I would put Gary Trent and Bogdan at like the top of my list of guys that I would want. And first off, because they're not 34 years old. Gary Trent's only 24. And
It's too young for the Bucks in actual facts.
Yeah, I know. Bogdan is 30, so that's more comfortable, right? More, 30. Okay, at least he's 30. But those guys, I just think, Bogdan as well, because he has at least a little bit more playmaking juice as well. Like, I mean, he can actually bring the ball up the court. He hasn't really had to do that in Atlanta, especially just given their point guard depth. But he did more of that in Sacramento, and then with the Serbian national team, he's been more of a point guard. So that is appealing. I mean, that was a reason why they were interested in him a couple of years ago. So I would put Trent and Bogdanovich ahead of, Bogdan ahead of Bojan and Eric Gordon. But again, a lot of that's just sort of the age component.
Lots of health stuff with Bogey as well. Bogdan, yeah. I should say. I can't say Bogey. There's Bogdan, yes.
Yeah, Bogdan, I mean, he's had knee injuries. Like basically, there's been these kind of random knee issues that have kind of bothered him since he got to Atlanta, essentially. We saw it in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Bucks, limited him. He did come back, but he seemed to be limited, missed the start of this year, but he's playing very well right now. So again, you hope that he is in a point where hopefully that some of that is behind him. But he's an expiring contract. So obviously that's a factor with all these things because, that's the other question. It's like the Bucks don't have a lot of cap flexibility. So if you're going out and paying top dollar for one of these guys in terms of assets, yes, the Bucks are absolutely in win now mode, but you really wouldn't want to have to give up, multiple second round picks or something like that. Or, again, I'm not even going to talk about Marjon Beauchamp. None of these guys, I think are guys I'm willing to put Marjon into a package for. I'm sure the other teams that's the first person they're going to ask about. I think, that would be an obvious thing from a Bucks asset list, but if you are giving up stuff, then if you're acquiring an expiring guy like Bogdan or Gary Trent, I mean, part of the reason those guys would be available is just because those teams are trying to figure out where are they going to spend their money. And, very similar situations in terms of, Toronto, like, what do they want to be, right? Like, are they going to try to ship off like Fred VanVleet, which just to me seems so weird. Like he's like the only point guard ball handler, that normal ball handler they have. And yet there's all these questions about, do they even want to pay him again, keep him, just given that he's getting into his late 20s. So, Gary Trent seems like the most likely guy to leave just based on some of the chatter. And he's obviously not a perfect player, but I do think he's a really solid fit for a team like the Bucks. Why don't I go through, I'll just read off kind of the remaining group that I have. And again, once you get into these guys, I think, they're cheaper, so they're easier to acquire, but I think they all have some warts, and or some of them who are better would just be hard to acquire. So our friend Dean Maniat's favorite, a member of the all handsome NBA team, Kelly Oubre, just had surgery on his hand. Is he out like a month or something like that? I think he's out a bit, which maybe depresses his value to an extent, but he's an expiring $12 million.
By the way, Frank, can I just jump in here? You've got just to let everyone know what this spreadsheet says. It's got name as a column, status as a column, age as a column, role as a column, and then sample offer. Now, some of this role stuff is very good, like Eric Gordon, expensive old two-way guard. Kelly Oubre is a handsome wing chucker.
The spreadsheet doesn't like him. He's handsome.
Right.
He plays the wing, and he's a chucker.
3 for 3.
And
Facts.
I think, and that's part of why he's available. He's only 26 still. He's a guy that has put up pretty big counting stats in past years. I think he can be a solid defender when engaged /motivated. But again, that's I think the question mark. I would not say he is a Bucks DNA type guy, in that regard. But hope springs eternal, and if you're a team like the Bucks, again, can you squint hard enough to say like, oh, maybe we can reach Kelly Oubre and get him to be the type of guy that we like. Didn't seem like that happened in Golden State. He was there for kind of the worst times in Golden State. Not that it was all his fault, but at least an intriguing guy. And again, could he play shooting guard or kind of wing alongside Middleton and Drew Holiday? Yeah, I guess he's good, but again, he's probably more of a 3-3-4 than a 2-3 or a 3-2. Alex Caruso. This one's an Eric name favorite. Eric's been talking to us about his love of Alex Caruso lately. I think he would be very difficult to acquire. We don't know what the hell the Bulls are going to be doing here. I think though, even if they were to switch to sell mode, he's got 2 years plus a non-guarantee at under $10 million a year, and every team that is a contender would love to have a guy like this. He basically doesn't shoot anymore. He's actually close to 40% from three, but it's like on 2 threes a game. Like we've seen the Bucks do this. They just like dare him to shoot. And he's one of these guys who like also misses really badly sometimes. So offensively, I mean, yes, he can handle the ball. He can bring it up. So if you're basically looking for essentially like a better defensive version, more versatile defensive version of George Hill at this point,
are you saying
that's kind of what he is to me? But he's really good and he's a winning guy. And again, I think it would be at least multiple seconds. And would someone give up a first round pick somewhere in the league? I think he could certainly command a first round pick, especially given his contract. So again, I don't think I don't think the Bulls are actually going to trade him. But if they did, I think it would have to be a pretty big offer that I don't think the Bucks can necessarily match.
Yeah, I've already said the Allen for Caruso trade would be hilarious. But you said that he can bring the ball up the floor. Are you saying if there's a team out there that's looking to protect a 21-point lead with 4 minutes left on the clock, he could be valuable? Because that's interesting to me.
Yeah. Guy that can dribble without falling over and kicking the ball out of bounds. It's a nice skill set to have. Maybe I won't go exact order, but let's go a couple guys in Utah. We've heard so much stuff about Jordan Clarkson. He's putting up 20 points a game this year. Not actually shooting that well if you look at it. I think his defensive engagement has actually been relatively high. I was talking to Seth about this on his pod. I think his argument was Clarkson's actually trying. So, is he going to be worse defensively than Grayson Allen? Probably not. They're basically the same size. So he could probably be like, okay. But I think there is a question of like, I think he's starting at this point. He's taking a ton of shots, averaging 20 points a game. He's probably having a grand old time, to be honest, living the full Jordan Clarkson experience, or at least to the extent you can do that in Salt Lake City. Again, could he fit in Milwaukee? I think he could. Could you start him? Probably. I don't know that that's the type of guy that you would start because again, I think he wants the ball in his hands. And I don't think with the starters, like you want a guy that's like going to be trying to dribble a bunch and take touches away from Giannis, Drew, and Chris. Probably again, more of a 6-man. He's a former 6-man of the year. And he's got 2 years left, but one of those is a player option. So essentially he's an expiring contract at close to $14 million a year. So again, and again, what is the price for this? Especially with Utah, like, this is one of those things, like if Utah, the wheels come off in Utah, then I'm sure they'd be much more open to moving him if they continue to be competitive. Are they going to go for a play-in spot? I don't know. But if they do, then obviously you might expect that they would be less interested in dealing him. The other guy there that I think is a very interesting target who I have not heard nearly as much chatter, certainly from the Bucks kind of fan Twitter side, is Malik Beasley. He's 25 years old. He's got I can't remember if it's a team option or non-guarantee, but either way, basically if you want him next year at around 16 million, you can keep him for an extra year. And at 25 years old, obviously, you're not trading for him unless you think that is good value for your money. He's a guy who averaged close to 20 points a game a few years ago in Minnesota. He's down to about 14 per game this year, but He is a close to 40% three-point shooter, and he shoots an absolute ton of threes. He's shooting almost 9 threes per game, despite the fact that he only plays like 20, 30 minutes or something like that per game. So he is a super high volume three-point shooter. That's what he does. And so if you're worried that Grayson Allen doesn't get up enough threes, Malik Beasley, I think, will find ways to get off more threes. And again, he's not, much bigger than a Grayson Allen type. But, again, he's not a wing stopper. Could he be a starter? Yeah, he could be a starter. But again, would you feel like he's your starter for the next 5 years and you're going to want to keep him forever? Like, I don't know if Malik Beasley's that guy either. So let me pause there. Any comments on the Utah guys? I feel like we've talked about Clarkson way more probably than we would have liked over the past few months already. But any thoughts on that group?
So my problem with Grayson Allen, and I said at the start that I was kind of, when the first talks came out about trading him for Jay Crowder, I was out. Certainly we're doing it in November because I wanted to see him play. I was hoping that guys would get healthy and we would get a look at what they potentially needed, and plus see whether Grayson Allen's taken any strides. Now, unfortunately, we've seen him go super cold these last few weeks. Obviously, he hit the game winner yesterday. So if you're just straight up going to be looking for someone that can score and you think can shoot the three and commands the respect of the defense, I think Jordan Clarkson does that. And I would say it's an upgrade as a scorer. He's going to have nights where he's not efficient, but I don't think anyone's going to be surprised. Like if the Bucks traded for Jordan Clarkson, I don't think anyone would be surprised if he had a 30-point playoff game. Whereas you would
win you a random playoff game.
Yeah. He can win you a playoff game, and he can score those 30 points in a half. Like he is a significant upgrade as a scorer for Grayson Allen. So that I would talk myself into that. If that's the only trade they made and that was the only one that was there, I'd be fine with it. That's what I'd say about Jordan Clarkson. He's just more dynamic as a scorer in virtually every single way. And as you said, the defensive stuff might be a wash. So I'm not totally against Jordan Clarkson if that's the best trade on the table.
Yeah, and I think if actually with Clarkson, it's less about just replacing Grayson Allen and more about basically a combination of replacing part of the Grayson Allen minutes and part of like the George Hill, Javon Carter minutes, because he is actually a backup point guard. So you could still start him and just then stagger him and Drew a lot, or you could opt, you could go either way with it. Let's kind of keep going in terms of these guys. So I guess on the topic of Utah guys and former Utah guys, Alec Burks. I think
popular.
Alec Burks might be I think maybe the most under the radar guy. He's 31 years old, so he's not he's not like a Gary Trent or a Malik Beasley guy who could be part of this sort of next wave of Giannis supporting cast or something like that. And the irony is, and I was joking with Steve Von Horn about this, like 11 years ago, 2011.
Well, we've just lost Frank. Frank has jumped out. The one thing I would say about Alec Burks, who's been having obviously a decent season as Frank was just getting into, he has definitely been someone that over the last few weeks when people jump in my Twitter mentions in terms of people that Bucks fans are interested in, probably more because he feels attainable. Like when you look at some of the names that are higher profile, as we've discussed, obviously Clarkson, Eric Gordon, all these players, they're probably guys that are more well-known, and Burks is completely under the radar. So that's probably why he feels like he's more attainable. And as Easy Fly says, Burks equals Frank Killer. I think that might be right. And we've discussed the stuff with Grayson Allen about has he put the ball on the floor a little bit more this season? And I think he certainly has. He hasn't necessarily finished with high efficiency at the rim. So if you, again, are looking for guys that are probably offensive upgrades, then maybe Burks is that guy. Certainly Jordan Clarkson is that guy. And as we were discussing, I don't think that in terms of a high-profile addition, Frank, I just don't think I'm talking about Alec Burks. I think he is one of the guys that just feels like he's more attainable because he's not.
Yeah, and apologies. I was on my iPhone and I did not have it plugged in, so there you go.
I thought we did have a comment that said Alec Burks is the Frank Killer, by the way. So
Well, I was saying 11 years ago, 2011 draft, this was when drafts were actually really important to the Bucks, right? I had gotten to the point, I had convinced myself I wanted Alec Burks over Klay Thompson. You guys remember what the Bucks had, I think the 11th pick in that draft, trading down and getting Tobias Harris, which, you could argue he was also better than Alec Burks. But Burks has had a really nice, and kind of under the radar, solid last couple of years. Early in his career, it was like, well, he's not he's not a good enough 3-point shooter. And then he's become a really good 3-point shooter the last few years. And he's got just kind of a bucket getting aspect to his game. He's not a big, strong, rugged wing defender by any stretch. But between this year in Detroit and also his 2 years in New York, a guy that the Knicks were always better defensively with him on the floor. The Pistons are better with him on the floor this year. There's kind of just some of these peripheral stats have actually been quietly pretty good with him. So I still would view him more as bench scorer type guy, bench scorer upgrade type guy who, if you acquire him and he's starting, you're not looking at him okay, yeah, let's have that guy start for the next 3 years or something like that. He's an expiring contract. I think it is a play basically where you're trading for him so that you can hopefully just get some more dynamic kind of shot creation from him this year and hope that the 3-point percentages kind of just continue as they have the last few years. But again, I do think he's a bit of an under the radar guy, and playing in Detroit, I mean, is there any illusion that he's going to be some long-term piece in Detroit? No, I don't think so. And so I do think he's a guy that if you're looking for somebody who could be available for just the price of Grayson Allen and nothing else, I think he's actually that type of guy. Makes about $10 million. So the salary is roughly matched. So that's what I like about Burks. And kind of similarly to, if we want to talk about guys who are kind of to some extent, sort of reclamation projects, Josh Richardson makes about $12 million. And the irony here is that he had some really promising early few years in Miami. He goes to Philly in the Jimmy Butler trade. I remember thinking oh man, Philly actually getting Josh Richardson, that's a decent save. At least they got a quality starter out of that. And then just never really seemed to work in Philly. He eventually ends up, he spends time in Dallas. He spends time in Boston, and it just feels like wherever he was, people just were Josh Richardson, kind of not great. And he's had kind of a quietly pretty solid year for the Spurs. But, again, what do the Spurs need from Josh Richardson, given where they are? They don't need Josh Richardson, right? I mean, I'm sure they would happily give Josh Richardson away for anything. And again, could that be as minimal as Grayson Allen? I think you'd have to add in a little more additional salary to make a deal. But again, he's a guy that is interesting because he's about 6'6", and he has sort of some combo guard skills. Again, do you want him running the offense in the playoffs against the Celtics? No. But he can actually dribble the ball up a basketball court. He's been a 4-assist guy at one point when he was in Miami. He averaged, he had a 16-point per game season. He's a solid 3-point shooter. Definitely he's not as good a 3-point shooter as Grayson Allen. He's not a really high volume 3-point shooter, but competent 3-point shooter. So again, if you're looking for a guy that is sort of a caretaker, and maybe more of kind of what early George Hill was, in Milwaukee, maybe that could be kind of the role he has, where he's kind of a bigger guard, can play the 1 or the 2 a bit and give you some of the depth that obviously right now we've seen tested. So I think Richardson's definitely an interesting guy. Again, our Bucks fans going to be doing backflips if the big, trade deadline acquisition is Josh Richardson or Alec Burks. I get it. People aren't going to be super excited about it, but if the price of doing that was, again, maybe you wouldn't even have to give up Grayson. I mean, can you get Josh Richardson for not even giving up Grayson Allen? I think probably the contracts are probably too tough to match at that point. But I don't think you'd have to. I mean, at that point, given Grayson Allen's age and contract control, can you actually well, maybe it'd be a little rich to expect the Spurs to give you a second round pick coming back in that deal. But at a minimum, I think he's at least a guy that if you squint at hard enough, maybe he does have 1 or 2 good playoff series in him. And I think he's a little more matchup proof given his size defensively than Grayson is. So to me, that one, we've talked about a number of guys who are like more, because they're more dynamic offensively, like a Clarkson or even a Beasley as a shooter. They're upgrades to Grayson Allen because of their offense. I look at Richardson as a guy who's like mainly more because of his defensive versatility and the fact that he can just handle the ball a little bit versus the fact that he's gonna, give you like some sort of dynamic scoring or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not that all that excited in Josh Richardson. I tell you who would laugh at Josh Richardson, probably Celtics fans. It seems like, as you pointed to, when he got traded to, and maybe Philadelphia fans as well, because when that trade went down, he was, as you pointed to, he was a young player with promise, and then he's kind of just bounced around since then. So again, Richardson, maybe it's low cost, but it kind of feels like crazy to say this. If you had said this 2 years ago, it would have been like a pretty hilarious thing. But give me Alec Burks over Josh Richardson for this team, which, again, it's just not something I would have seen myself saying 24 months ago. Who haven't we got to from this list? Cam Reddish is interesting. Is that?
Yeah, I think the two other guys that I would sort of call like reclamation projects to an extent, I think Cam Reddish is probably the biggest reclamation project. I mean, he's an expiring $6 million contract. So the appeal there is that he's cheap in terms of acquiring. You wouldn't even necessarily need to include Grayson Allen in that type of trade. I don't know really what the Knicks would be looking for, but considering that Cam Reddish is like basically like not, part of their rotation right now, it may not need to be a whole lot. He hasn't been playing lately at all. I think, it's funny. Reddish is a former lottery pick. He's a guy that I have always been very skeptical of. I always pointed to his like 2-point field goal percentage at Duke, even in like high school, like was always underwhelming. He's just a guy that like just has never been able to be consistently efficient. His 3-point shot has shown at least some degree of development. Maybe the best game of his life came against the Bucks in what was that game 6 of the Eastern Finals when he just like hit. Did he hit 6
come back from injury and just couldn't miss?
Yeah, and so I think for him, it's again he's got really good size. Again, is he going to be your starting shooting guard the rest of this year? I don't really think that is a fair expectation, but he is kind of a flyer type guy. He's still very young, and he has defensive tools as well that I think you would look at and say, hey, we can put him on the floor defensively against the Boston Celtics. And okay, do you want him, having to lock down Jason Tatum for extended stretches? No, but at least switchable in a pinch. Can he handle, a guy like with Jaylen Brown size, Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon are not going to just completely overpower him or something like that. So he's at least a guy that is kind of like interesting. I think there was a recycled rumor of Bucks interest in him at one point. I don't think there's been any confirmed interest from the Bucks during this season, but I think there maybe have been some like thing where the Bucks kicked the tires like at the draft last year or something like that. So he's again another guy that it's like, oh, we don't have anything else going on. Okay. George Hill and Jordan Wara, like later guys, like bring in Cam Reddish and see if there's really anything that you might be able to get out of him. The other guy who he is playing, and I think he actually has been starting here of late, but Gary Harris with the Magic, he was a guy that we talked about a little bit during the summer. I was surprised at the contract number that he got, $13 million a year. I thought he might even have maybe he could have even been a mid-level type guy, probably not a taxpayer mid-level guy, but maybe just a non-tax mid-level at 9 million, 10 million. Instead, he gets kind of him and Mo Bamba kind of both got these like, sort of 1+. I think they're both non-guaranteed or something their second years. So essentially kind of like kept them on the books, gave them a nice contract number this year. But, are the Magic sold on those guys as sort of long-term solutions? Like, let's be honest, probably not, right? So again, he's 28 years old. I mean, he's the same age as Grayson Allen. There are definitely a fair bit of similarities. He seems to have recovered some of his 3-point shooting that he kind of mysteriously lost amid injury in Denver when he had such a promising start to his career. He's 6'4". He's not a really big guy, but I think at least certainly his reputation would be stronger as a defender, and certainly a shooting guard and a guy that you could say, okay, that's going to be our starting shooting guard for the rest of this year, and that would feel like a reasonable thing to do. But again, is he some big upgrade over Grayson Allen? Probably not. And so I do think you'd probably need to include, a second round pick or something like that if you're shipping out, Grayson Allen and George Hill or something like that. So yeah, let's call, Josh Richardson, Gary Harris, Cam Reddish. We can call those guys sort of the reclamation projects, as it were. And so again, like if the price is too steep on some of the guys that we mentioned earlier, again, maybe those are guys that you get at a more favorable discount, and could still be guys that have some sort of positive role and niche on this Bucks roster.
Yeah, and Gary Harris, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, was part of the Aaron Gordon deal and was actually really liked in Denver, but they obviously found a trade, and sometimes that's the way it goes. And we had a question in the stream asking, why are we anti-Grayson Allen? Well, the big point of all this is just the $10 million salary. The Bucks don't have a lot of salary to put together 4 trades, and Grayson Allen is the obvious candidate. I would say it would be a pretty difficult life that he is living at the moment in terms of understanding the situation when it comes to a trade. And if the Bucks are making a trade, he's almost certainly going to be in it. So yeah, maybe it's not a surprise that he's been missing some shots. I'm sure he's feeling a bit of extra pressure these last few weeks. So we should obviously acknowledge that. I think we've hit every name on this list. Justin Holiday is one you've got there. Frank, and as I mentioned, you've got the role there. 3-and-D wings / nepotism targets. Another Holiday, add him to the roster, you think?
I mean, Giannis and Brooke have had their brothers on the team, so it would only be fair to bring Justin out, to bring another Holiday into the mix. But yeah, I mean, 33, which kind of sneaky. Like I used to always think of Justin as being younger than Drew, just because he wasn't a highly touted guy that got to the league early, but he is actually older than Drew. I mean, we've seen him, with like the Pacers recently. Like he's a guy that can get hot from 3, and as a shooter has some dynamism, solid defender. So again, as sort of a cheap option would not necessarily be a bad fit. But yeah, we always got to look for these brother connections, right? We know the Bucks love a good family reunion on their roster. So yeah, I think that kind of covers everything. And again, if we miss something, miss someone, let us know. I've got a bunch of other guys that are, if we were talking about power forwards or small ball centers, things like that, there are a bunch of other guys that I think we talked about during the summer that I'm not really putting on my list now, whether it's Harrison Barnes. Obviously we've talked about Crowder a lot, Larry Nance, PJ Washington, Kenrich Williams. Like there are a lot of guys out there that, under other circumstances I might find more interesting, but I think just, again, kind of looking at, well, what is the Bucks' actual need and where are their questions? I think to the question about why do we not like Grayson Allen? I mean, I think we've been probably much more defenders of Grayson Allen than many people. I think he's a very solid NBA player in sort of the abstract sense, but I think it's just like, I keep coming back to, fundamentally, I think you need to largely optimize this roster using the question of how do you match up with the Boston Celtics, and who's, the big question I think they have is, who is your starting shooting guard against the Boston Celtics? We've seen now through last year's playoffs, and we saw it again on Christmas Day, like Grayson Allen just is not a good matchup for the Boston Celtics. Again, if you had another guy that you felt good about starting at shooting guard, whether it was, Pat Connaughton or hell, Marjon Beauchamp, like give the kid a chance over the rest of this season, just kind of see what he has and hope that he's a quick study and can, not sort of drown in the pressure of the playoffs. Hey, I'm open to that discussion, and Grayson Allen becomes a bench guy, then I don't feel as much urgency to try to make a move around Grayson Allen. But if the Bucks are sitting around saying like, hey, Grayson Allen is our starting shooting guard, then as you said, he's the most obvious salary to move, and he's the most obvious position that you need to upgrade. And the other piece too is, I mean, we know there's been there've been verified reports of the Bucks shopping him and looking at this potential Crowder deal and other potential opportunities. So it only makes sense for us to talk about deals with using him as the primary salary, because we know that the Bucks have been actively shopping him and seeing what they could get for Grayson Allen. So again, nothing personal to Grayson Allen. Thankfully he broke out of his slump in the second half last night and hit that huge shot to win that game in Toronto. And again, the bar is it's not like he's, some bad player that, almost anybody you acquire would be better than. I think the shooting in particular, some of the off the dribble kind of rim attack, closeout attacking, he's been good in that regard. But the question again is, from a matchup perspective, from a playoff perspective, and who are you going to go into the trenches with against the Boston Celtics? I just think the Bucks have to be looking at other options beyond Grayson. And again, it's not just Grayson; it's also the backup point guards as well. What other options do they have there to kind of make a difference?
All right, let's look to wrap this up. But one name that's come up in the stream quite a bit, particularly here in the last few minutes, Kyle Kuzma. Kyle Kuzma, who we just saw a couple times in a row, and he took about 95 shots in that last game that we saw there and did not make many of them. He's got 13 mil this year, a 13 mil player option next year. I think it's very clear that Milwaukee is not the city for him long term. But, honestly, if you were asking me if for whatever reason, and I suspect he's played pretty well, so I suspect that they would probably want a first round pick or something like that, even though it is only probably going to be a rental. But if for some reason you could pull something off, like similar to the PJ Tucker trade, and get Kyle Kuzma for the run to the postseason, I'd be down for that. If it was Allen and pieces that you don't think are going to play in the postseason, so Kuzma at least interest me, Frank. And then before we go, I have to bring up this man. If you're making a 2-for-1 trade and you're like, hey, we need some guard help as well, late season addition, Dante Exum playing very nice basketball over in Europe, getting you about 12 points per game, over 40% from three, around 4 assists per game. Excellent defense. We saw in the Olympics. At times he was defending Kevin Durant. He can defend. He can switch. He's got size at the guard position. So I'm just throwing Dante Exum up there. If you make a trade somewhere else, do whatever you can to drag that man over. And I don't know if you can trust him health-wise for 82 games, Frank, but for a run to the postseason, he's a guy you could play straight away. He's been balling out over there.
Hey, you don't need to make the case to me. I mean, by the way, when you brought up Kuzma, I thought you were going to say, oh, people in the stream talking about Dante Exum. No, nobody in the stream is talking about Dante Exum. No, I like Exum. I mean, he's 6'6", right? I think for a team like the Bucks where you can use some ball handling, but you're not looking for a guy that needs to run the offense all the time. The fact that he's shot I don't know what I don't know if you know offhand what he's shooting from three this year. I know last year in Europe, he shot the 3-ball extremely well. And I think he shot it pretty well in the Olympics as well. Obviously slightly shorter line, but it seems like the 3-point shot has been solid. And again, I don't think you're looking at him as like, oh, he's the solution to all your problems at the starting shooting guard spot. I think it's more about like, hey, here's a guy that is potentially, pretty dynamic with the ball. Bucks are a team that do not have a lot of athleticism and, rim attacking ability. And certainly, we're again seeing that they're kind of always having to make compromises in terms of guys that can play offense versus play some defense. And there's a version of Dante Exum, I think, that can defend at at least average to positive, above average level in the NBA. I mean, you saw that. That Utah series, I think they played a couple times, but he defended James Harden back in those. This is probably 3-4 years ago at this point, but I just remember being really impressed with his tenacity on ball and again his size. Is a big asset for him. So yeah, I mean, just as a basketball fan, I hope he makes it back to the NBA at some point, just because he had such a kind of disappointing career in terms of the injuries and just sort of never kind of getting things to work out between Utah and Cleveland and wherever else he ended up. So yeah, shout out to Dante Exum as the perpetual. Why don't we take a flyer on this guy? He would be fun at some point, but. Yeah, let's just say let's not all get worked up about Dante Exum, because I'm gonna go ahead and say that I do not expect to see Dante Exum in the NBA, let alone play for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Agree. 45% from three this season across 27 games. pretty small volume, obviously.
Wait, who is he playing? Is he playing in Turkey this year or something? Where is he playing?
Partizan.
Serbia, Belgrade.
Yeah. Fortunately, we get all their games over here. Who would have thought? But yeah, honestly, I don't think he's coming to the NBA. I'm happy to see him healthy as well, though. Shout out to Dante.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, not to diminish Belgrade, but selling Milwaukee shouldn't be too hard if the guy's playing in Belgrade, right? I mean, come on, Dante. The water's warm. Talk to our guy Joe Ingles. Talk to our guy Kane Pittman. Have you ever interviewed Dante at any point?
I was in Utah a couple of times when he was over there, and they wouldn't let me officially interview him because he was injured. But we just hung out in the locker room a few times. He's a nice guy. I don't think he loves doing that stuff. I've been chasing him for years and have been knocked back every time. Hey, it's actually a theme.
He might not just like you. He might just not like you. I mean, again,
I don't think anyone does. And I don't know why. I'm a nice guy, Frank.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, super nice guy.
Let's wrap it up. We've been going an hour. What do you think?
Well, if we're going to go an hour, I mean, we actually prepared. I put stuff on a goddamn spreadsheet for this. So I think if ever we're going to go an hour, it's on a topic like this. So hopefully people have had their mind stimulated. And if you guys think of other potential targets, let us know. And just to my 2 cents on Kuzma, again, I didn't include him because I don't think he's a guy that role wise, again, I just don't think a kind of a big 3, but more of a 4 type player. I just don't think that's really kind of the Bucks need, especially given that he's not going to come cheap. He's had a really good year. I mean, he's averaging 21, 7, and 3 or something like that. He's looking for a huge payday. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really look at him as a guy that I want to, would want to commit. I don't know what Kyle Kuzma wants. I'm sure Kyle Kuzma thinks he's $30 million a year player or something like that. I don't share that enthusiasm. Certainly for 14 million, 13 million, he's great value. But I think there's also going to be a fair bit of competition for his services. So yeah, the Bucks just don't feel like a team that would be the landing destination, especially if his best position is probably the same one as a certain Giannis Antetokounmpo.
All right. Thanks for listening to Locked On Bucks today. We absolutely appreciate it, but make sure you listen to Game NBA as well. Some crazy scores across the league today. I seen the Nuggets were up by about 40 on the Clippers, but there's every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This won't be the last time we have a trade conversation, Frank, but the Bucks are back in action tomorrow. They're playing Charlotte. And at this point in time, Chris Middleton out, no surprise, but everyone else seems like they've been at least listed as probable. So we might get at least close to a full slate of players, but we'll find out closer to tip off. It is the weekend and it is Charlotte. So let's just say it's a maybe for a post-game pod on the weekend. But if you subscribe and you've got the notifications on, then you'll know if we decide to do it. So make sure you do that. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. As Frank said, continue to send through your names and your potential trades. What the hell are you laughing at, Frank?
So when I'm on my phone, I can't see the comments. I'm on my desktop, and now I can see the comments, and I'm just enjoying some of the comments. Cerulean Clouds with the comment, Ibaka is the team cook, bro. They can't trade him. I thought when I saw Cook and Serge Ibaka, and I thought it was some comment about Serge Ibaka being cooked, which may also be true. But anyway, Serge Ibaka is the team cook, team chef, just kind of makes me laugh. We don't really talk about Serge Ibaka a whole lot, which is probably for the best. And I really hope we don't in like a month after the trade deadline. I really hope there's not some injury to our bigs, and we say, "Oh crap, why didn't the Bucks acquire a big man that could help them play, small ball lineups." Then I'll be taking back my whole obsession with shooting guards and wings and stuff. But knock on wood, Brook Lopez, good health or bust. That's I think the reality for the Bucks this year.
No question. And Green Ranger a little bit late to the party, I think. Unfortunately, he said, can we please discuss a prototypical shooting guard, someone 6'6" tall? I'm going to have to get you to get back to the start of the podcast, my friend. Plenty of discussions along the way of plenty of names. We appreciate it. If you did jump in late, go back to the start. and have a listen. Frank does the groundwork for this podcast in a situation like this. There's no doubt about it. All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks to everyone for jumping in on the live stream. We absolutely appreciate it. Like I said, subscribe and you'll know when we have a podcast next. But Monday to Friday, guaranteed. Weekends, you never know what's going on. Bucks and Hornets tomorrow. Enjoy the game.